Happy Sunday, everybody. ABC 10 meteorologist Brenden Mincheff here. And we're going to talk a little bit of drought today. And we're going to talk about the Scott Valley up in far northern California. And they're stuck in what they call drought with air quotes. We'll get into the details of that in just a few minutes here. But first, we finally had our first 80-degree day in downtown Sacramento. That happened back Monday of last week when this video was recorded. April 10th, 83 degrees is what we made it to. We've had some other 70-degree days since then, but that's the only day in the 80s so far. We've normally had our first 85-degree day at this point. That usually happens on April 10th, but we've not been to 85 degrees since last October. And we also have not had a first 90-degree day yet. Thank goodness. That usually happens at the start of May. So let's get into the drought and the drought monitor. Things continue to improve, especially in the Sacramento Valley, where drought continues to lift, and really it continues to lift all across the state. Now, almost 2/3 of the state of California are not in any drought whatsoever. That's 65.67% of the state. Another 25% of the state is in the yellow abnormally dry category, which, again, we've talked about it every week. Technically, is not drought. That's recovering drought. But I do want to point out Northern California up here. You notice we still have that level 1 moderate drought as about 8 to 9% of the state. That is where Scott Valley is, and we're going to talk more about that. That's the subject of today's video. We'll see that at the end. But first, we're going to continue to talk about drought a little bit because this is the best the drought has looked since the start of February 2020 when the drought score was 34. The drought score now flipped the numbers around 43. And again, we continue to improve with drought. We do expect to see drought lift just about everywhere across California by the time we get to the drier summer months. I do want to mention very briefly that the transition from La Niña to El Niño is well underway, and we can see that here. I'm going to let this play again. So this is where we are now. This is what it looked like in the middle of January. Notice the abnormally cool waters across the tropical Pacific. That is the hallmark of a La Niña. But then as we work through March, notice how the water really starts to warm up off the coast of South America. And then notice we go from the cold anomaly to right about zero. That's because we're in an INSO neutral, right? El Niño Southern Oscillation. That's what this pattern is called. We're in a neutral pattern now, and we're on the way to an El Niño. So we're transitioning. We're in between right now. We were very much in a La Niña, especially over the last 3 years, and especially in January as well. But you see how that eroded away as we worked through the last 3 months, and we're now well out of La Niña and well on our way into El Niño, which we can talk about what that means, but basically it means we have a slightly better than average chance of having a wetter than average year in Northern California. When we get to next winter, we'll talk more about El Niño as, things really develop and we move out of our wet season here. But first, we're going to spend some more time talking about the precip that we've already had. We've had a little more in April. We're up to almost 0.2 of an inch of rain in April. And on the water year so far, we're well over 25.5 inches. That is plus 8.5 inches above where we normally are to this point in the water year. And of course, that continues to be the case all across California from north to south, and even Redding now 7 inches above where they normally are. Eureka 3 inches above where they normally are. Northern California, no different. San Francisco, Sacramento, Stockton, South Lake Tahoe, Fresno, all those areas above average. Continues down south. Santa Barbara, LA, San Diego, all above average as well. A very similar story with SNOWPACK, 208% of the average to date for Northern Sierra SNOWPACK, 241% of the average to date for the Central Sierra. That's where a lot of our ski resorts are. And then in the Southern Sierra, 314% average snowpack to date. Now, of course, this is really all going to start melting out as we get into the warmer, drier months here later on through spring. We do even have a flood watch this weekend as we talk right now. In fact, recording this video for the high Sierra locations because of the snow melt, right? When we have temperatures in the 50s and 60s up there, that's really going to help to accelerate the amount of snow that is melted and how quickly that melts. Now, we don't really expect any downstream issues, but there's a flood watch up there. One thing I do want to mention before I move on real fast is that waters are going to be so cold, right? Rivers up in the Sierra and also rivers down in the valley, because really it's all snow melt right now. It's not rain runoff. It's not a lot of water coming from other locations. This is all snow melt water right now. So it is very cold still. So even if we get days that are in the 70s, 80s for, valley high temperatures, you get in that water, it's going to be cold. It's going to be 40s and 50s in that water, and that's going to create shock, and your muscles are going to get weak and all of that. So it's really important that you know before you go, and you're very careful about hopping into rivers and things like that, because even experienced swimmers, even strong swimmers in very cold water like that can have muscle weakness and unfortunately can result in drowning deaths. So just be careful if you're near water. Really, that's going to continue to be the trend through most of the spring and into the summer as well. Our reservoirs, though, are really benefiting from the snowmelt. Shasta, 92% capacity. Oroville, 88% capacity. Folsom, 73% capacity. And the numbers are even better down south, where still the San Luis Reservoir is up at capacity right now. As we look at Trinity, this is one of the lakes that we've talked about a lot. And yes, they are doing some maintenance up there, but the sources that I'm hearing from say this is all normal releases. Normally, though, it goes through the hydropower plant, but because they are doing the work up there, they can't send that water through the hydropower plant, so they have to send it out the very visible auxiliary spillway, which is why we're seeing releases from Trinity. But those are just environmental releases to keep the river flowing, nothing more than that. It still continues to climb just a little bit right now, but Trinity is primarily a snowpack-fed reservoir, which is why it's so low still right now, as that snowpack is starting to melt, but we're not quite there yet. So it's at 38% capacity, and the average date is 50%. But because it is so low, it is helping to keep the drought score going up there. And that's going to take us up to Siskiyou County. This is the focus of our story today. Far northern California, right? This is a pretty rural county. We don't hear a whole lot about Siskiyou County. But Scott Valley was recently watching one of our drought update videos, and they reached out because they wanted to share their story from Scott Valley and the fact that they are still in drought despite the fact that they've had quite the season in terms of rain and snow. So here's a picture from Scott Valley. This is sent from Theodora Johnson, who is our interview subject today. We'll talk to her in just a second. But I do want to show you these numbers. The Scott Valley watershed, 101% of average to date when it comes to precipitation. That's on the water year. And then 167% of average to date for the snowpack. So they are above average. And that's why they want to know, why are they still in drought? That is a question they are asking the state, because this is now another year that they are faced with severe drought restrictions. Of course, remember, the Klamath River Basin was one of the only basins still talked about, right? Colorado River Basin and a couple of others. But that's pretty much it that the governor said still needs to adhere to some of these drought restrictions because the rivers need protection. But the farmers up there, the agri people up there, they say that's not necessarily the case, and they want to know why they have to still adhere to these restrictions despite the above average rainfall and snowfall they've received.
Scott Valley is in Siskiyou County at the far northern end of the state. We're a little farming and ranching community. We're in a small valley that's nestled into, we're based at the base of the Marble Mountains and the Scott Mountains, and we're a snowmelt fed system primarily. So when we have a great snowpack like we do this year, we know we're going to have a good water year.
Theodora Johnson, a spokesperson with the Scott Valley Agriculture Water Alliance, like many in the Scott Valley, is proud of her home. And they don't take what they have for granted. But the years-long drought hurt Scott Valley hard.
We love where we come from. We love our valley. We have a local ordinance to keep our open spaces open, which we kind of self-imposed. We want to keep it this way. And we've been laboring under an emergency drought regulation since August of 21 that has been very catastrophic for us. We were in a serious drought, but the regulation on us was going to curtail our groundwater by 100% unless we agreed to reduce our groundwater use by 30%. And this is just for agricultural use. We were also limited in how much water we were allowed to give our cattle and sheep during a curtailment. So it was curtailments and regulation that none of the rest of the state saw. It was very unique to us and our neighbor in Shasta Valley. And it was, we felt very harsh. And now this year, we're actually expected to continue under the same regulation despite the wet water year we're having.
The Klamath River watershed is one of only 3 watersheds mentioned by name still under the emergency drought regulations. And even though drought is lifting across the state, Scott Valley and Siskiyou County are still under the D1 moderate conditions.
It's disappointing that we're still in D1. because our snowpack is at 167% for snow water equivalent in Scott Valley. And then the snow depth is 178, I believe. And then I know the surrounding watersheds are doing quite well too. We have Shasta, the neighboring Shasta Valley is at 162% snow water equivalent. And then Trinity is now being considered a wet water year at 186 snow water equivalent. And even the Upper Klamath Basin, according to NRCS, National Water and Climate Center, has 191%. I believe that's for snowpack. So we're happy, we're looking good. Luckily, our cold nights are kind of holding on to this snowpack. We want to keep our snowpack. That's what saves us for all winter long. And you may have seen the Klamath National Forest report on the snowpack. They were very impressed. And with the snowpack, it just came out on the 10th because they weren't even able to access a lot of the sites until that late. Usually it's an April 1st report.
Scott Valley also does a lot of work on groundwater recharge. They aren't new to this. They've been doing it for years, and it shows.
Even though we have a healthy aquifer, we recognize that you do need to take care of your aquifer. And we're very proactive about that. And we also recognize we've been pushing what we call environmental managed aquifer recharge. And the reason we call it environmental is that we don't have ground subsidence. We don't have an aquifer that's suffering. By putting this water in the ground in the winter when flows are generally abundant, there's plenty of water. And of course, we're not going to divert more out of the river than fish populations can withstand or anything like that. But when it's excess flows, that's when it's time to store it, squirrel it away for a dry day. We want to be proactive. We want to come up with ways to manage our aquifer to keep for water for everyone, for fish, for the farming and ranching community. And so we really want to work with the water board to make that happen. But the regulation that we're under now is about to do us in. So we won't be here to do that good work, to work together with the state if this regulation continues. So the unprecedented nature of this regulation, cutting off groundwater, which hasn't been done in the state, wasn't done anywhere else, limiting how much livestock we're allowed to drink, which seems like borderline animal cruelty because that's really hard to do. We want something different. We need something different here.
Ultimately, she wants the state to remove the emergency drought regulations on the Scott Valley. They're doing more harm than good at this point. And with much above average snowpack and snow water equivalent, she wants the valley and its farmers to get back to managing their land and water in the ways they know best.
One of the things that the emergency regulation did was over the winter months, it prohibited us from using our earthen ditches to water our livestock, which is something we've done for 100 years. And those earthen ditches, in a way, are doing recharge by, spreading out water over the landscape, and it's recharging the aquifer at the same time that it's providing an important water source for our animals. And so we've been asking the state, can you please just be mindful that this is a practice that we do for more than one reason, and it's kept our aquifer healthy. So if we have a stable aquifer that's not overdrafted, why would you come in and try to fix what's not broken?